Mahtab hummed a soft tune as her needle danced through the silk. Her small room, tucked away above her father's bakery, was filled with the scent of warm bread and the rustle of fine fabrics. She was known throughout the city for her nimble fingers, capable of weaving magic with thread. She could mend a torn robe so seamlessly it looked untouched, or embroider a wedding veil with flowers so lifelike they seemed to sway in the breeze. Mahtab dreamed of opening her own small shop, a place filled with colorful silks and happy customers. But her dreams felt distant now, overshadowed by the heavy cloud of her father's debts. The bakery, once bustling, now struggled. The aroma of fresh bread was often tinged with the bitter scent of worry. Sultan Shahin surveyed his kingdom from the high balcony of his palace. The city sprawled before him, a tapestry of bustling markets, quiet homes and grand mosques. He was a man of few words, his face often stern, his decisions swift and unwavering. He carried the weight of his kingdom on his shoulders, a burden that grew heavier with each passing year. The nobles whispered of his strength, his enemies trembled at his name. Yet behind the mask of authority, Shahin yearned for something more. He longed for a connection, a moment of genuine human interaction, free from the stifling constraints of courtly life. He was tired of the endless ceremonies, the hollow flattery, the constant maneuvering for power. He craved simplicity, honesty, a moment of peace in the gilded cage of his palace. The wedding chamber was a whirlwind of gold and velvet. Lamps cast a warm glow on the rich tapestries that adorned the walls. The air was thick with the scent of exotic flowers and burning incense. Mahtab sat on the edge of the enormous bed, her wedding finery heavy upon her. The elaborate silk gown felt like a cage, the jeweled headdress a crown of thorns. Tears streamed down her face, leaving dark streaks on the carefully applied makeup. She had never felt so alone, so lost. The bustling marketplace, the familiar warmth of her father's bakery, felt a world away. She was now the Sultan's wife, a title that filled her with more dread than joy. She knew nothing of palace life, nothing of the man she was now bound to. All she knew was fear. The heavy doors opened, and Sultan Shahin entered. He paused, taking in the sight of his young bride. He had expected a display of regal composure, perhaps a shy smile. Instead, he saw a young woman trembling with fear, her face streaked with tears. He saw not a sultana, but a frightened girl. Something in his stern demeanor softened. He approached her slowly, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpets. Instead of taking his customary place beside her on the bed, he did something unexpected. He removed his shoes and sat on the floor, lowering himself as one would before an honored elder. He gestured to a servant who brought in a tray with a steaming pot of tea and delicate pastries. He poured a cup and offered it to Mahtab, his voice gentle. "Drink this," he said. "It will calm your nerves." He listened patiently as she haltingly explained her fears, her voice barely a whisper. He did not interrupt, did not offer platitudes. He simply listened, acknowledging her distress, treating her not as a subject, but as a person. The news of the Sultan's unusual behavior spread through the palace like wildfire. Servants whispered in hushed tones as they polished silver and arranged flowers. The nobles, accustomed to the Sultan's rigid adherence to tradition, exchanged puzzled glances. Auntie Zuleika, the palace's chief etiquette officer, pursed her lips in disapproval. She saw the Sultan's simple act of kindness as a dangerous breach of protocol, a sign of weakness. The Sultan should be on the throne, not on the floor, she sniffed to her assistant. What will the other kingdoms think? They will see us as soft, vulnerable. The whispers reached Mahtab as well. She overheard two maids gossiping while she walked through the gardens. "Did you hear?" one whispered. "The Sultan took off his shoes for her, like she was some kind of holy woman." The other maid giggled. "Imagine! the great Sultan Shahin, sitting on the floor like a commoner. Mahtab felt a blush creep up her cheeks. She was not a holy woman, just a frightened girl who had found a moment of unexpected kindness. Despite the whispers and the sideways glances, a strange sense of calm settled over Mahtab. The Sultan's simple gesture had changed something. It had chipped away at the wall of fear that had separated them. She no longer saw him as a distant, intimidating ruler. She saw a man who, despite his stern exterior, possessed a hidden gentleness. During a formal dinner, their eyes met across the long, elaborately decorated table. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched the Sultan's lips. Mahtab's heart fluttered. It was a shared secret, a silent acknowledgement of the unusual bond that had formed between them. Later, as Mahtab strolled through the palace gardens, she found the Sultan sitting by the fountain, lost in thought. He looked up as she approached, his expression softening. They spoke for a few minutes, not of politics or courtly matters, but of the simple things. The scent of the jasmine flowers, the coolness of the evening air, the stories her father used to tell her about the stars. It was a stolen moment, a brief respite from the formality and ceremony that surrounded them. In that moment, they were not Sultan and Sultana, but two people finding solace in each other's company. A small bouquet of desert flowers appeared on Mahtab's dressing table. They were not the extravagant blooms favored by the court, but simple, hardy blossoms that thrived in the harsh desert sun. Tiny purple desert lilies, delicate white sand verbena, and a single, vibrant red desert rose. There was no note, no grand declaration, just the flowers, their vibrant colors a stark contrast to the opulent surroundings. Mahtab knew instantly who had sent them: the Sultan. She recognized the red desert rose. He had worn one tucked into his sash during their first meeting, a splash of color against his formal attire. She had learned, in the few days since her arrival, that flowers held a special meaning for Sultan Shahin. He rarely wore them, but when he did, they were always desert blooms, a reminder of his childhood spent roaming the vast, open landscapes beyond the city walls. Each flower held a specific meaning, a silent language understood only by those who knew the desert's secrets. The purple lilies represented respect, the white verbena signified admiration, and the red desert rose, a symbol of enduring love. Mahtab's heart swelled with a mixture of gratitude and wonder. The Sultan's gesture was not one of romantic passion, but of deep respect and quiet admiration. It was a gesture that spoke volumes in its simplicity. She carefully placed the flowers in a small vase, their delicate fragrance filling the room. The scent of the desert blooms was a welcome change from the heavy perfumes favored by the court. It reminded her of home, of the simple life she had left behind. She closed her eyes, inhaling the familiar scent, and a sense of peace settled over her. As the days passed, Mahtab began to see beyond the Sultan's stern facade. She saw the intelligence in his eyes, the kindness in his small gestures, the weariness in his occasional sigh. He would often seek her out, not for formal audiences or ceremonial duties, but for simple conversation. He would ask her about her day, her thoughts, her dreams. He listened intently as she spoke, offering thoughtful responses and insightful observations. He spoke to her not as a sultan to his subject, but as one human being to another. He shared with her his concerns about the kingdom, the burdens of leadership, the loneliness of power. He confided in her his dreams of a more just and prosperous kingdom, a place where all his people could thrive. Mahtab listened patiently, offering words of comfort and encouragement. She found herself drawn to his quiet strength, his unwavering commitment to his people, his hidden vulnerability. She realized that the man she had once feared was, in fact, a man of great depth and compassion. Mahtab found solace in the palace gardens. The fragrant blossoms and the gentle murmur of the fountains offered a welcome escape from the stifling formality of court life. One evening, as she sat by the lily pond, Sultan Shahin joined her. He sat beside her, not on a gilded throne, but on the cool stone edge of the pond. He spoke of the pressures he faced, the constant demands of the nobles, the weight of his responsibilities. He confessed his weariness, his longing for a moment of peace. Mahtab listened quietly, her heart aching for the man who seemed so burdened. She too felt the weight of her new role, the constant scrutiny of the court, the fear of making a mistake. She confided in him her anxieties, her worries about her family, her uncertainty about her place in the palace. She spoke of her simple dreams, the small shop she had hoped to open, the life she had left behind. Shahin listened intently, his eyes filled with understanding. He spoke of his own childhood, his memories of the desert, his dreams for a better future for his kingdom. They spoke not as Sultan and Sultana, but as two people sharing their fears and hopes. In that shared vulnerability, a deeper bond was forged, a secret understanding that transcended the formality of their roles. Shahin, emboldened by their shared confidences, revealed a secret he had held close for many years. He spoke of a hidden oasis deep in the desert, a place of breathtaking beauty, known only to a few. He described the crystal-clear waters, the lush vegetation, the sense of profound peace that permeated the air. It was his sanctuary, a place where he could escape the pressures of the palace and reconnect with the simple joys of life. He had never shared this secret with anyone, not even his closest advisors. But with Mahtab, it felt natural, as if she were already a part of his innermost world. Mahtab listened, captivated by his description. She could almost feel the cool desert breeze on her skin, smell the fragrant blossoms, hear the gentle murmur of the water. She felt honored that he had chosen to share this precious secret with her. It was a gift, a symbol of the trust that was growing between them. In that moment, surrounded by the beauty of the palace gardens, they were not Sultan and Sultana, but two kindred spirits sharing a secret, a bond that would forever link their destinies. Auntie Zuleika surveyed the dining hall with a hawk-like gaze. Every fork, every napkin, every whispered word was subject to her scrutiny. As chief etiquette officer, she ruled the palace with an iron fist, enforcing the rigid traditions with unwavering zeal. She believed that every gesture, every glance, every word spoken within the palace walls reflected the Sultan's authority, the kingdom's strength. Any deviation from the established protocol was, in her eyes, a direct affront to the Sultan and a threat to the very fabric of their society. She had watched with growing disapproval the subtle changes that had been creeping into the palace since Mahtab's arrival. The Sultan's unexpected kindness on their wedding night, the whispered conversations in the gardens, the shared smiles across the dinner table, all these small, seemingly insignificant moments chipped away at the rigid structure Zuleika had so carefully constructed. She saw Mahtab as a disruptive force, a naive girl who, with her simple ways and unconventional behavior, was undermining centuries of tradition. That morning, during the formal breakfast, Mahtab had committed a grave offense. Instead of accepting a cup of tea from the designated servant, she had reached across the table and taken a cup directly from the Sultan. It was a small gesture, a moment of natural, unthinking familiarity. But to Zuleika, it was an act of unforgivable disrespect. Sultana Mahtab, Zuleika's voice, sharp and cold, cut through the hushed murmur of the dining hall. All eyes turned towards Mahtab, who blushed crimson under the weight of the collective gaze. Perhaps you are unfamiliar with the proper etiquette for accepting refreshments at the royal table. Zuleika's words dripped with sarcasm. It is customary to wait for the designated servant to present the cup. Reaching across the table, as you just did, is a grave breach of protocol. Mahtab stammered an apology, her voice barely a whisper. She had not meant to cause offense. It had simply felt natural to take the cup from the Sultan, a gesture of the easy companionship that had grown between them. But Zuleika was relentless. "Your ignorance of our customs is no excuse, Sultana," she continued, her voice rising. "You are the Sultan's wife, and your behavior reflects upon him and upon the entire kingdom. You must learn to conduct yourself with the decorum and respect befitting your position." Zuleika's public reprimand left Mahtab humiliated and shaken. The weight of tradition, the suffocating formality of palace life, pressed down upon her. She felt like a small boat caught in a raging storm, tossed about by forces she could not control. She longed for the simplicity of her old life, the familiar comfort of her father's bakery, the freedom to be herself without the constant scrutiny of 1,000 judging eyes. The Sultan's advisors, a group of stern-faced men with long beards and elaborate turbans, gathered in the private council chamber. They paced the richly carpeted floor, their voices low and urgent. "Your Majesty," one advisor began, his voice laced with concern, "the nobles are growing restless. They whisper of your unconventional behavior with the Sultana." Another advisor chimed in. "They say you are neglecting your duties, spending too much time in the gardens, not enough time attending to matters of state." Shahin listened patiently, his face impassive. He knew the advisors spoke the truth. He had been neglecting his duties, drawn away by the quiet companionship he found with Mahtab. He had found in her a solace he had never known before, a connection that transcended the formality and ceremony of court life. But he also knew the importance of his role, the responsibility he bore for the well-being of his kingdom. He was torn between his duty and his heart, between the demands of tradition and the yearning for genuine connection. Mahtab sat by her window, gazing out at the bustling city below. The vibrant tapestry of life seemed so far away, separated from her by the high palace walls. She too felt the growing tension, the whispers of disapproval that echoed through the palace halls. She had overheard the servants gossiping, their voices hushed but laced with judgment. "The Sultan is changing," one had whispered. "He is not the same since she arrived." Another had replied, "She is a bad influence. She does not understand our ways." Mahtab's heart ached. She had not meant to cause division, to disrupt the established order. She had simply been herself, a simple seamstress who had found herself unexpectedly thrust into a world of unimaginable luxury and suffocating tradition. She worried that her presence was harming the Sultan, that her unconventional ways were undermining his authority. She wondered if she should leave, return to the simple life she had known, the life she had left behind. But the thought of leaving Shahin, of losing the precious connection they had forged, filled her with a profound sense of loss. She was trapped between her love for him and her fear of causing him harm, between her desire to stay and her duty to protect him. Mahtab's joy began to fade, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. The whispers in the halls grew louder, the disapproving glances more pointed. She felt like an impostor in the opulent gowns and jeweled headdresses, a simple seamstress playing a role she was ill-suited for. Doubts crept into her mind, whispering insidious questions. Did she truly belong in this world of gilded cages and rigid traditions? Was her presence a threat to Shahin, a distraction from his duties? The weight of the kingdom, the burden of his responsibilities, seemed to rest heavily upon his shoulders. Was she adding to that burden, pulling him away from the important work he was meant to do? The thought of causing him harm, of being the source of his troubles, filled her with a deep sense of guilt. Shahin sensed the change in Mahtab. The light in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by a shadow of doubt. He found her one afternoon in the palace gardens, sitting by the fountain, her gaze fixed on the cascading water. He sat beside her, taking her hand in his. "What troubles you, my dear?" he asked, his voice gentle. Mahtab hesitated, unsure how to express the turmoil within her. I fear I am not worthy of this life," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "I am but a simple seamstress, and this palace, this kingdom, it is too much for me." She looked away, ashamed of her weakness. Shaheen lifted her chin, forcing her to meet his gaze. "You are worthy, Mahtab," he said, his voice firm. "You are kind, intelligent, and brave. You possess a strength that many in this court lack." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "You are not a burden, Mahtab. You are a blessing. You remind me of what truly matters, of the values I hold dear: kindness, honesty, compassion." He squeezed her hand, his touch reassuring. "Do not let the whispers of others dim your light. You belong here, Mahtab. You belong with me." His words were a balm to her wounded spirit. The doubts did not vanish entirely, but their sharp edges softened. She looked at Shaheen, at the strength and gentleness in his eyes, and a sense of hope flickered within her. Perhaps she could find her place in this strange new world. Perhaps she could be a source of strength for him, not a burden. Perhaps together they could navigate the treacherous currents of palace life and create a new path, one built on mutual respect, understanding, and love. Mahtab found herself drawn to the familiar comfort of the palace sewing room. It was a quiet sanctuary, a place where the rhythmic whir of the spinning wheels and the soft rustle of fabric soothed her troubled mind. The room was filled with bolts of colorful silks, spools of gleaming thread, and the comforting scent of beeswax and lavender. She had spent many hours in similar rooms, her nimble fingers transforming simple fabrics into works of art. Here, surrounded by the tools of her trade, she felt a sense of peace, a connection to the life she had left behind. She had been tasked with organizing the palace linen inventory, a tedious but necessary chore. As she meticulously counted the stacks of embroidered napkins, the piles of velvet cushions, and the rolls of fine linen, she noticed something amiss. The numbers didn't add up. According to the records, the palace had purchased a large quantity of silk thread just a few weeks prior, yet the shelves where the silk thread should have been stored were nearly empty. She checked the records again, double-checking the dates and quantities. There was no mistake. A significant amount of silk thread, enough to make several elaborate gowns, was missing. Mahtab's curiosity was piqued. She knew the palace stores were carefully guarded, and theft was rare. She began to investigate, discreetly questioning the sewing women and the storekeepers. No one seemed to know where the missing silk had gone. Some shrugged their shoulders, others mumbled vague excuses. But one young sewing woman, a shy girl named Amira, offered a hesitant clue. "I saw Auntie Zuleika carrying a large bundle of silk out of the storeroom a few weeks ago," she whispered, her eyes darting nervously around the room. "But I didn't dare ask her what she was doing with it. She frightens me." Mahtab's suspicions began to solidify. Auntie Zuleika, with her rigid adherence to palace rules and her iron grip on the household staff, seemed an unlikely thief. But the missing silk, Amira's hesitant confession, and the vague responses of the other staff members all pointed in her direction. Mahtab knew she had stumbled upon something potentially dangerous, a secret that could shake the foundations of the palace. But her innate sense of justice, her unwavering belief in honesty and fairness, compelled her to investigate further. She knew she had to unravel the threads of this mystery, no matter where they might lead. Mahtab knew she had to tread carefully. Accusing Auntie Zuleika, a respected figure in the palace, of theft was a dangerous undertaking. She needed proof, solid evidence that would support her suspicions. She confided in Amira, the young sewing woman who had witnessed Zuleika carrying the silk. Amira, though frightened, agreed to help. Together, they began a discreet investigation. They meticulously examined the palace records, searching for any discrepancies, any clues that might shed light on the missing silk. They questioned the other servants, carefully probing for information, always mindful of Zuleika's watchful eyes and sharp ears. They worked late into the night, their whispers barely audible above the hum of the sewing machines. They discovered that Zuleika often left the palace late at night, ostensibly to attend to personal matters. This, in itself, was unusual. The chief etiquette officer rarely left the palace grounds, preferring to maintain a constant presence within the royal household. Mahtab and Amira began to follow Zuleika, keeping a safe distance, their shadows blending with the darkness. They tracked her to a small, unassuming shop in a quiet corner of the city. The shop, ostensibly a purveyor of fine fabrics, was closed at that late hour. But through a crack in the shutters, they saw Zuleika inside, handing over bundles of silk to a shadowy figure. The figure, in turn, gave Zuleika a small pouch, which she quickly tucked into her robe. Mahtab and Amira continued their surveillance for several nights, gathering more evidence. They discovered that Zuleika was running an underground market, selling the palace linens and pocketing the profits. She used her position as chief etiquette officer to enforce strict rules and maintain control over the palace staff, ensuring their silence through fear and intimidation. She had created a web of secrecy, a system of fear that allowed her to operate undetected. As Mahtab gathered more evidence, she realized the danger she was in. Zuleika was a powerful enemy, a woman who would stop at nothing to protect her secrets. Mahtab knew she had to be careful, to move quickly and decisively. She was playing a dangerous game, and the stakes were high. Not only was her own reputation at risk, but also the stability of the palace and perhaps the future of the kingdom. Mahtab held the small, leather-bound ledger in her trembling hands. It was the proof she needed, the final piece of the puzzle that would expose Auntie Zuleika's treachery. The ledger, which she had discovered hidden deep within Zuleika's private chambers, detailed the intricate workings of the underground market. It listed the names of Zuleika's accomplices, the quantities of stolen goods, and the exorbitant prices she charged for the palace linens. It was a damning indictment, a testament to Zuleika's greed and deceit. She had confided in Amira, sharing the evidence she had gathered. Amira, though still frightened, was resolute in her support. "We must tell the Sultan," she had urged. "He will know what to do." Mahtab agreed. It was time to bring Zuleika's scheme to light, to expose the corruption that had festered within the palace walls. She sought an audience with Shahin, her heart pounding in her chest. She presented him with the ledger, explaining her findings, her voice trembling with a mixture of fear and determination. Shahin listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. He carefully examined the ledger, his eyes scanning the meticulously recorded entries. As he read, his expression hardened. He had always respected Zuleika, valuing her unwavering adherence to tradition, her strict enforcement of palace protocol. He had seen her as a pillar of the royal household, a symbol of order and stability. It was difficult for him to believe the accusations, to accept the idea that such a respected figure could be capable of such deceit. "Are you certain of this, Mahtab?" he asked, his voice grave. "This is a serious accusation. Auntie Zuleika has served the palace faithfully for many years." Mahtab nodded, her gaze firm. "I am certain, Your Majesty," she replied. "The evidence is clear. The missing silk, the secret meetings, the ledger. It all points to her." She recounted the events of the past few weeks, describing her investigation, Amira's testimony, the late-night surveillance of Zuleika's activities. She spoke with conviction, her voice ringing with the truth of her words. Shaheen listened, his mind struggling to reconcile the image he had of Zuleika with the evidence before him. He wanted to believe in her innocence, to dismiss the accusations as a misunderstanding, but the facts were undeniable. The ledger, the missing silk, the whispered testimonies, it all painted a picture of betrayal and deceit. A shadow of doubt began to creep into his mind, a doubt that would soon grow into a chilling certainty. Mahtab stood before Shaheen, the incriminating ledger clutched tightly in her hand. She had laid out the evidence piece by piece, detailing Zuleika's elaborate scheme. The missing silk, the late-night meetings, the coded entries in the ledger, it all pointed to the chief etiquette officer's guilt. Shaheen listened, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. Disbelief warred with dawning realization. Zuleika had served the palace for decades, a symbol of unwavering loyalty and adherence to tradition. The thought of her betrayal was a bitter pill to swallow. He summoned Zuleika to the council chamber. She entered, her back ramrod straight, her face composed. She bowed stiffly, her eyes meeting Shaheen's with an air of cool indifference. "You summoned me, Your Majesty," she inquired, her voice smooth and even. Shaheen held up the ledger, its leather cover worn and cracked. "Auntie Zuleika," he began, his voice heavy with disappointment, "we have reason to believe you have been misappropriating palace funds." Zuleika's composure faltered for a moment, a flicker of fear crossing her face, but she quickly recovered, her expression hardening into a mask of indignation. "Misappropriating funds! Your Majesty, I am shocked and appalled by such an accusation. I have served this palace faithfully for years, and my integrity is beyond reproach." "Then perhaps you can explain this," Shaheen said, placing the ledger on the table before her. "This ledger details a rather intricate system of acquiring and selling palace linens, linens that, according to our records, are mysteriously missing." Zuleika's eyes darted towards the ledger, then back to Shaheen. She opened her mouth to speak, then closed it again, her mind racing. She had been so careful, so meticulous in covering her tracks. How could they have discovered her secret? Seeing her hesitation, Mahtab stepped forward. "Auntie Zuleika," she said, her voice calm and steady, "I have witnessed your late-night meetings, the exchange of goods, the money changing hands. I have spoken to the servants, those you have intimidated into silence. There is no escaping the truth." Zuleika's eyes narrowed, her gaze fixing on Mahtab with a venomous glare. Cornered and desperate, she lashed out. "Lies!" she hissed. "It is she who is the thief. She is jealous of my position, of my influence. She has fabricated this evidence to discredit me, to usurp my authority." She turned to Shaheen, her voice trembling with feigned outrage. "Your Majesty, do not believe her lies. She is a manipulative, deceitful girl who will stop at nothing to achieve her ambitions." The room fell silent. The air crackled with tension. Shaheen looked from Zuleika to Mahtab, his face etched with uncertainty. Whom should he believe? The respected etiquette officer who had served the palace for decades, or the young sultana who had brought these shocking accusations to light? The truth, hidden beneath layers of deceit and betrayal, remained elusive, shrouded in a web of conflicting testimonies. The fate of Zuleika, and perhaps even Mahtab, hung precariously in the balance. Shaheen felt the weight of the kingdom pressing down on him. He sat on his throne, the symbol of his authority, but felt anything but powerful. Before him stood two women, each claiming innocence, each accusing the other. Auntie Zuleika, her face a mask of righteous indignation, continued her tirade against Mahtab. "She is a cunning manipulator, Your Majesty," she insisted. "She has twisted the truth, poisoned your mind against me. Do not be fooled by her innocent facade." Mahtab stood silently, her gaze steady, her hands clasped before her. She had spoken her truth, presented the evidence. Now it was up to Shahin to decide whom to believe. The court was divided. The nobles whispered amongst themselves, their faces reflecting a mixture of shock and confusion. Some sided with Zuleika, citing her long and impeccable service to the palace. Others, swayed by Mahtab's quiet conviction and the undeniable evidence of the ledger, believed in her accusations. Shahin struggled to make sense of the conflicting testimonies. He had trusted Zuleika implicitly, relying on her unwavering adherence to tradition, her strict enforcement of palace protocol. But the evidence against her was substantial. The missing silk, the secret meetings, the detailed records in the ledger, it all pointed to her guilt, yet a part of him still hesitated. Could he truly believe that this woman, who had served the palace so faithfully for so many years, was capable of such deceit? He looked at Mahtab, at the quiet strength in her eyes, the unwavering conviction in her stance. He remembered their conversations in the gardens, the shared confidences, the growing bond between them. He had seen her honesty, her compassion, her unwavering commitment to justice. Could he doubt her word? He rose from his throne, his voice echoing through the silent chamber. "This matter requires further investigation," he declared. "I will not make a judgment based on accusations and counter-accusations. I will uncover the truth, no matter how unpleasant it may be." He ordered a thorough search of Zuleika's chambers, instructing the guards to leave no stone unturned. He summoned the palace scribes, ordering them to meticulously examine the financial records, to trace the flow of goods and money, to uncover any discrepancies. He interviewed the servants, listening patiently to their hesitant testimonies, piecing together the fragments of information. The investigation lasted for several days, the tension in the palace thick enough to cut with a knife. Zuleika remained defiant, vehemently denying the accusations, continuing to accuse Mahtab of treachery. Mahtab, though shaken by Zuleika's relentless attacks, remained steadfast, her faith in Shahin's judgment unwavering. As the investigation progressed, more evidence came to light. Hidden compartments were discovered in Zuleika's chambers, containing bundles of silk and pouches of gold. Discrepancies were found in the palace accounts, revealing a pattern of missing funds and unexplained transactions. Servants, emboldened by Shahin's commitment to uncovering the truth, came forward with further testimonies, corroborating Mahtab's accusations. The web of Zuleika's deceit, so carefully woven over so many years, began to unravel, thread by thread. The air in the council chamber was thick with anticipation. Shahin sat on his throne, his face grave. The investigation had yielded a wealth of evidence, painting a damning picture of Auntie Zuleika's treachery. The hidden compartments, the missing funds, the corroborating testimonies of the palace staff, it all pointed to her guilt. He held up a small, intricately carved wooden box. "This box," he announced, his voice echoing through the silent chamber, "was discovered hidden behind a loose stone in Auntie Zuleika's private chambers. Inside, we found not only a substantial amount of gold, but also several letters." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Letters written in Auntie Zuleika's own hand, detailing her transactions with the merchants who purchased the stolen linens. Letters that clearly outline her scheme to defraud the palace. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled nobles. They looked at Zuleika, their faces a mixture of shock and disbelief. The woman who had once been a symbol of impeccable conduct, of unwavering loyalty, now stood exposed as a thief and a liar. Zuleika's face was ashen. Her carefully constructed facade of composure crumbled. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The evidence was overwhelming, irrefutable. There was no escaping the truth. Shahin continued, his voice steady and unwavering. The investigation has also revealed that Auntie Zuleika used her position to intimidate and silence the palace staff. She threatened those who questioned her actions, ensuring their compliance through fear and intimidation. He looked directly at Zuleika, his eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and disappointment. "You have betrayed the trust placed in you, Auntie Zuleika. You have abused your authority, enriching yourself at the expense of the palace and its people." He turned to the assembled court, his voice ringing with authority. "The evidence is clear. Auntie Zuleika is guilty of theft, embezzlement, and abuse of power." Zuleika, defeated and exposed, finally spoke, her voice barely a whisper. I did it for my family," she mumbled, her eyes downcast. "My brother, he was ill. I needed the money for his medical expenses." Shaheen's expression softened slightly. He understood the desperation that could drive a person to such extremes, but it did not excuse her actions. "Your concern for your family is understandable," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "But it does not justify your crimes. You have broken the law, betrayed the trust of the palace, and caused harm to many innocent people." He paused, his gaze sweeping over the assembled court. "Let this be a lesson to all," he declared, his voice ringing with authority. "No one is above the law. No matter how high their position, how long their service, justice will be served." Auntie Zuleika was dismissed from her position and banished from the palace. The news spread quickly, rippling through the palace halls and out into the city streets. The nobles, who had once whispered about the Sultan's unconventional behavior, now spoke in hushed tones of Zuleika's downfall. Some expressed shock and disbelief, others a quiet satisfaction. The servants, freed from the grip of her iron rule, breathed a collective sigh of relief. Shaheen summoned Mahtab to the council chamber. He stood before her, his face softened by a gentle smile. "Mahtab," he said, his voice warm with gratitude, "you have done a great service to this palace, to this kingdom. You have exposed corruption, brought justice to light, and restored integrity to our household." He took her hand in his touch gentle but firm. "Your courage and honesty are an inspiration to us all." He turned to the assembled court, his voice ringing with authority. "I wish to publicly acknowledge Sultana Mahtab's bravery and integrity," he declared. "She has shown us that true strength lies not in rigid adherence to tradition, but in the courage to speak truth to power, to fight for what is right, no matter the cost." He then announced a series of reforms, changes that would forever alter the fabric of palace life. The rigid etiquette codes, enforced for centuries by Zuleika's iron hand, were relaxed. He established a system of checks and balances to prevent future abuses of power. He created a council of servants, giving them a voice in palace affairs, ensuring their concerns would be heard and addressed. He looked at Mahtab, his eyes filled with admiration. "You have shown us the way, Mahtab," he said. "You have taught us that kindness and compassion are not weaknesses, but strengths. You have reminded us that true leadership lies not in enforcing rigid rules, but in fostering a culture of honesty, respect, and understanding." A wave of relief washed over Mahtab. She had been so afraid, so uncertain of her place in this strange new world, but now she felt a sense of belonging, a sense of purpose. She had not only exposed corruption, but had also helped to create a more just and compassionate environment within the palace walls. The palace, once a place of stifling formality and rigid tradition, began to transform. Laughter and conversation echoed through the halls. Servants moved with a newfound sense of freedom and respect. The rigid hierarchy that had once defined palace life began to soften, replaced by a spirit of cooperation and mutual understanding. A new era had begun, an era of kindness, honesty, and hope. And at the heart of this transformation stood Mahtab, the simple seamstress who had dared to challenge the established order, the young sultana who had shown that even the most powerful traditions could be changed by the unwavering strength of a single, courageous heart. The story of Mahtab and Sultan Shahin became a legend whispered throughout the kingdom. It was a tale not of a damsel in distress rescued by a valiant prince, but of two individuals from vastly different worlds who found strength and solace in each other's company. Their unconventional beginning, marked by tears and a simple act of kindness, blossomed into a marriage built on mutual respect, understanding, and a shared commitment to justice. The rigid formality that had once characterized the palace gave way to a warmer, more compassionate atmosphere. Shahin, inspired by Mahtab's gentle spirit and unwavering honesty, continued to reform the palace, creating a more just and equitable environment for all. Mahtab, no longer the frightened girl who had arrived at the palace with trembling hands, embraced her role as sultana with grace and determination. She had found her voice, her purpose. She was no longer merely the Sultan's wife, but a respected figure in her own right, a symbol of hope and change. She used her influence to improve the lives of the palace staff, establishing fair wages and providing opportunities for education and advancement. Remembering her own dreams of a small sewing shop, Mahtab established sewing schools throughout the kingdom, providing young girls with the skills and resources to create their own livelihoods. She encouraged them to embrace their creativity, to pursue their passions, to build their own futures. These schools, known as Mahtab's Houses of Thread, became havens for young women, places where they could learn, grow, and dream. She also introduced reforms to the palace workshops, ensuring that the artisans and craftspeople who created the beautiful textiles and intricate jewelry were treated with fairness and respect. She established fair wages, provided safe working conditions, and encouraged innovation and creativity. The palace workshops, once places of drudgery and exploitation, became centers of excellence, renowned throughout the kingdom for the quality and beauty of their creations. Shahin watched with pride as Mahtab blossomed, her quiet strength and unwavering compassion transforming not only the palace, but the entire kingdom. He had found in her not just a wife, but a partner, a confidant, a source of inspiration. He had learned from her the true meaning of leadership, the importance of listening to the voices of his people, the power of kindness and compassion. Their evenings were often spent in the palace gardens, sitting by the fountain, sharing stories and dreams. They spoke of their hopes for the future, their vision of a kingdom where justice and prosperity reigned, where all people, regardless of their station, were treated with dignity and respect. Years passed, and their love story continued to inspire. They ruled together, side by side, their reign marked by wisdom, compassion, and a deep commitment to the well-being of their people. The legend of the seamstress and the Sultan, the tale of the girl who had dared to cry on the wedding bed, and the Sultan who had taken off his shoes as if she were an honored elder, was passed down through generations, a testament to the enduring power of kindness, courage, and love. It was a reminder that true greatness lies not in power or wealth, but in the simple acts of human connection, in the unwavering commitment to justice and compassion, in the enduring legacy of a life lived with integrity and grace.